When the Galactic Defense Academy accepted an exchange student from Earth, they expected a warrior. They got Luna Reeves, silent, fragile, and utterly dismissed. But then the combat demonstration began, and she asked one quiet question. Which ones? What followed wasn't just skill. It was a revelation that made every cadet and commander question everything they knew about humanity. This is the moment their assumptions shattered. You know what they expected when Earth sent their exchange student? The docking bay doors parted with that hydraulic hiss you only get on galactic defense vessels. The kind of sound that says military precision, even in the air molecules. And there she stood. Luna Reeves, this small pale figure swallowed by the metallic grandeur of the Academy's main deck. She looked less like a warrior and more like something you'd find catalogued under fragile artifacts in a museum annex. Cadet Thorne. Alpha's voice cut across the observation deck before the environmental seals had even finished cycling. First contact protocol must be malfunctioning, he called out just loud enough for everyone to hear. They sent us a librarian. Laughter rippled through the ranks, that low, condescending kind only career soldiers perfect. I was reviewing Commander Vex 9's private logs that afternoon. His entry from that hour still sticks with me. He wrote, "If this specimen represents humanity's finest, their entire species' reputation is either grossly exaggerated or dangerously misunderstood. That's the thing about military minds. They love categorizing things. And Luna? She got filed under insignificant before she'd taken 5 steps into the compound. Every veteran instructor on deck measured her with that same clinical dismissal. I watched their eyes track her movement, those practiced glances that could assess threat levels down to whether a Zahirian dust mite might pose a biohazard. She rated lower. The Academy's whole culture is built on prowess and bravado. 2 things this quiet figure distinctly lacked: the institutional assumption built fast, humanity's legendary resilience, their supposed tenacity in deep space conflicts, their tactical innovations. It had to be myth. Exaggerated stories from fringe colonies. Luna became the subject of open derision without ever speaking, without even making eye contact. She just stood there, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the glowing tactical displays like a tourist at a historic site. The stage was set perfectly for the greatest miscalculation in galactic defense history. We'd categorized her, dismissed her, written her off in official reports. We were so confident in our assessment that protocol demanded the next step, the mandatory combat demonstration. They called for it not to test her, but to formally document her inadequacy. Just another box to check before reassignment to some minor diplomatic outpost. That's when they activated the arena. The combat arena hummed with that particular energy only training drones generate, a low, aggressive thrumming that vibrated through the deck plates and into your bones. Standard Defense Academy procedure. 6 drones floated into formation, their repulsor fields creating faint heat shimmers in the air. The instructors on the observation deck didn't even bother looking at Luna. This was just another routine demonstration. Another chance to show off alien martial prowess to what they assumed was a primitive audience. They'd done this drill 1,000 times for visiting dignitaries from newer spacefaring cultures. Luna stood completely motionless in her designated corner. She looked utterly overwhelmed by the spectacle, her eyes tracking the drones with what appeared to be hesitant fascination. It was the exact picture of someone in over their head, a child at a weapons exhibition. Cadet Thorne, leaning against the railing with that permanent smirk, couldn't resist. "Try not to blink, little human," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the drone hum. You might miss the whole show. More subdued laughter from the cadets. They expected no response. They'd gotten none for 3 standard cycles. Then her voice cut through the noise, quiet but clear as polished crystal. "Which ones?" The room didn't go silent gradually. It snapped silent. The hum of the drone suddenly sounded obnoxiously loud in the absence of chatter. Every head turned. Commander Vex 9, who had been reviewing a datapad with a bored expression, slowly lowered it and leaned forward on the command rail. His brow furrowed slightly. It was the first time anyone had heard her speak, and the question itself was so utterly simple, so utterly confounding, that it hung in the air like a physical object. Instructor Kelm Prime, who was running the demonstration, blinked. "I'm sorry? Which ones am I supposed to engage?" Luna asked, her tone flat, practical. There was no fear in it, no hesitation, just a request for clarification. The assumption in the room had been that she was asking which drones she was supposed to try and fight. A question of participation, a question born of uncertainty about the test parameters. But that wasn't it. Not at all. The way she stood now, the slight shift in her posture from overwhelmed visitor to something else entirely, it reframed the question completely. She wasn't asking which ones to fight. She was asking which ones to destroy. It was a question of selection. A tactical assessment made in a split second. A prioritization of targets. The simplicity of the question masked its brutal efficiency. However, in that moment, nobody on the deck understood what she was actually asking. They heard the words, but they completely missed the meaning. They still saw the fragile exchange student, not the operator hidden in plain sight. Instructor Kelm, recovering his composure, gestured dismissively toward the drones. "Start with the basic ones if you can." He said it like he was humoring a child. The condescension was practically a physical layer in the air. That was their second mistake. Instructor Kelm Prime gestured toward the floating training drones with that particular brand of weary condescension, veterans reserve for anyone who isn't them. You could see it in the tilt of his head, the slight sigh he didn't quite hide. The drones were the most basic models in the Academy's inventory, the kind cadets used in their first-week orientation. Glowing a soft blue, they moved in slow, predictable patterns designed to be intercepted. The expectation in the room was palpable. They weren't just expecting her to struggle. They were expecting a complete failure. A spectacle of incompetence to confirm their assessment of humanity's weakness. The air practically hummed with their collective dismissal. Luna simply nodded. Then her entire posture shifted. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. No sudden flare of energy or alien glow. It was a subtle but total realignment of her body into something grounded and ancient. Her feet settled into a wider stance, one slightly behind the other. Her shoulders squared, her hands came up, one protecting her face, the other held ready. It was a posture that looked fundamentally, undeniably terrestrial. It spoke of dust and open plains, of simple physics and leverage. Not advanced technology or exotic energy fields. It was the antithesis of everything the Galactic Defense Academy valued. Her first movement wasn't flashy. It wasn't some spinning kick or energy discharge. It was a basic straight punch, a textbook boxing strike, the kind you'd see in a historical vid about pre-spaceflight human conflict. Her fist drove forward in a clean, efficient line. It connected with the center of the nearest drone's chassis with a sound that was profoundly wrong. It wasn't the sharp crack of deactivating hardware or the dull thud of an impact. It was a deep percussive crunch, the sound of something structural giving way completely. The drone didn't power down. It didn't wobble and float gently to the floor. It shattered. The casing fragmented into a dozen pieces that clattered against the deck plating. The internal components, including the hardened core, simply disintegrated under the force. Tiny fragments skittered across the polished floor. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint sizzle of a ruptured power cell. On the observation deck, a console alarm blared once before being hastily silenced. The force measurement system, calibrated to register the kinetic output of plasma rifles and particle beams, had overloaded its sensors trying to quantify the impact. The readout flashed an error code I hadn't seen since a frigate once accidentally collided with a docking arm. A technician muttered something about needing a full recalibration, his voice shaky. I looked away from the console and back at the cadets. Their smirks were gone. Every single one of them was just staring, their faces blank with a kind of stunned incomprehension. The laughter had been utterly erased. What they had dismissed as a primitive, almost comical technique had just revealed a devastating and precise power they couldn't model. It defied their understanding of biomechanics and material science. The sheer focused force required to do that, to not just disable but to obliterate a reinforced training unit with a single, unaugmented strike, was off every scale they used. It suggested a level of controlled output that was supposed to be impossible for a biological organism of her size and mass. Luna lowered her hand. She glanced at the scattered debris, then looked back at Instructor Kelm, whose condescending posture had completely evaporated, replaced by rigid attention. Her expression hadn't changed. There was no pride, no smugness. It was the same placid calm she'd had since she arrived. "That was a boxing strike," she said, her voice still quiet, still even. It was a simple statement of fact. An identification, Then she added the part that made the silence in the room turn from stunned to deeply uneasy. "It's one of our foundational disciplines." She said it casually, like she was listing ingredients. It was just one item. The implication that there were more, that this terrifying demonstration was merely an entry-level example, hung in the air like a physical weight. The reaction on the observation deck wasn't immediate comprehension. It was a slow, dawning reassessment. The shattered drone was an anomaly, a data point that didn't fit the model. The technicians recalibrated the force sensors with annoyed efficiency, their expressions suggesting a belief that the equipment had simply malfunctioned. Instructor Kelm, regaining some of his composure, gave a sharp signal to the control booth. A second wave of drones descended from the ceiling recesses. These were different. Their casings glowed a deeper orange, indicating reinforced shielding. Articulated energy-dampening panels unfolded from their sides. These weren't training units. They were intermediate-level combat drones, the kind used for cadet squad tactics. The assumption was clear. The first strike was a fluke. A lucky hit. Perhaps the human was simply specialized against that one specific type of target. The setup was designed to prove her limitation, not her capability. Luna watched them deploy. Her expression remained neutral, but her body relaxed into a state of readiness that was fluid, almost languid. She didn't adopt a single stance. She flowed through several, her weight shifting from one foot to the other in a silent, graceful dance. Each posture was unique, a geometry of limbs and balance that the Academy's extensive species database had no record of. They were patterns of movement that looked alien, not because they were extraterrestrial, but because they were so purely, fundamentally human. She stopped in one position, one arm extended, the other drawn back. She looked at Instructor Kelm. "Karate next?" she asked. Her tone was flat, practical. She might as well have been asking about the lunch menu. She didn't wait for an answer. One of the orange drones darted toward her, its repulsors whining at a higher pitch. She didn't punch it. She pivoted on one foot, her entire body becoming a lever. Her other leg snapped upward in a perfectly vertical arc, her heel connecting with the top of the drone's chassis. The impact wasn't a crunch this time. It was a sharp, explosive pop. The drone didn't just break. It compressed, its internal frame buckling under a force that struck from an unexpected vector. It hit the floor with a dead-weight thud, its lights extinguished. The impact ratio calculations on the observation monitors flickered and scrambled again. The force was not only immense but delivered with a biomechanical efficiency that their models said was impossible. She straightened up. The remaining drones hovered, their tactical processors recalculating. Luna glanced at them, then back toward the silent, watching officers. She began to speak, her voice still that same quiet, cataloging tone. "Judo utilizes leverage and an opponent's momentum. Aikido focuses on redirection and joint control. Muay Thai employs 8 points of contact: knees, elbows, shins, fists. Krav Maga is an efficient, pragmatic, no rules. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is for ground engagement and submission." Each name was a statement. Each one was a label for a complete system, a centuries-old school of thought dedicated to the refinement of empty-hand violence. She wasn't boasting. She was providing a clinical inventory. The sheer volume of it, the casual listing of so many distinct methodologies, became deeply alarming. It wasn't a show of force. It was a demonstration of cultural depth, a depth specifically dedicated to combat. The resolution clicked into place on the observation deck. They finally understood. This wasn't a performance. This was an information dump. She was auditing their understanding of human capability, and they were failing the test spectacularly. Stunned by the display, one of the junior officers, perhaps trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation, activated the weapon rack. Blades and energy weapons slid forward on magnetic rails, gleaming under the arena lights. "Perhaps you would prefer a tool more suited to—" he began, his voice trailing off as she turned her head to look at the array. Luna shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible motion. "Unnecessary," she said. That was all. The refusal was so understated, so matter-of-fact, that it carried more weight than any dramatic rejection. It wasn't a statement of pride. It was a statement of fact. Her confidence wasn't in the weapons she could hold. It was in the weapons she already was. The tools on the rack were just extras. The real arsenal was standing in the middle of the arena, looking entirely ordinary. The klaxons didn't blare. That was the first detail everyone noticed later during the debrief. There was no warning. The standard alert system, the one tied into the long-range sensors and orbital traffic control, was dark. It was down for its monthly software patch and hardware diagnostic. Standard procedure. The maintenance schedule was publicly available information, filed with Galactic Command for transparency. It was the most vulnerable 8-hour window in the Academy's entire quarterly cycle. 17. Hegemony assault craft dropped from orbital. Concealment exactly 3 minutes after the defense network status officially switched to offline. They didn't decloak slowly. 1 second the scanner displays showed empty space. The next they were painted with 17 hostile signatures descending at attack velocity. Their approach vector was perfect. A shallow dive that avoided the passive sensor blindsides and maximized their coverage of the primary docking bays and command spire. It was a move from a textbook, executed with chilling precision. The emergency evac protocol auto-initiated, but the status board lit up with a cascade of amber warnings. Evacuation capacity was limited to 40%. The shuttle bay's main launch rail was undergoing structural reinforcement. Half the escape pods were cycled out for engine upgrades, another routine infrastructure project, another detail in the public maintenance log. The Hegemonies hadn't just chosen a time when we couldn't see them coming. They'd chosen a time when we couldn't run. Then the comms died. Not static, not jamming. A complete, absolute dead zone. Orbital disruption fields snapped into place. A coordinated web of energy that severed all tight beam and hyperwave communication with Galactic Command. It was a clean cut. No distress call got out. The command center monitors that usually showed the bustling traffic of nearby sectors went black. We were isolated. The final layer sealed our fate. Heavy containment fields, the kind used for containing reactor breaches or biohazards, activated across the Academy's major internal transit corridors and external hangar doors. They glowed a faint, ominous purple. They weren't a hegemony technology. They were our own emergency systems, hacked and weaponized against us. No one was getting in to help. No one was getting out to escape. The Academy became a sealed box. The timing was too perfect. It wasn't luck. It was surgical intelligence gathering. They knew the schedules. They knew the vulnerabilities. They knew the exact moment when the Galactic Defense Academy, the pinnacle of military preparedness, would be at its absolute weakest. This indicated more than just good spies. It suggested inside knowledge, a leak or a mole. The controlled nature of the crisis was what made it so effective. This wasn't a berserker raid. It was a precise, calculated operation, designed to force every defender inside to improvise under maximum pressure with limited resources. We were reacting. They were executing a plan. The resolution clicked into place on the command deck as we watched their deployment patterns on the internal security feeds. They weren't swarming the armory or the command center. They weren't targeting the power core for a catastrophic detonation. They were moving in coordinated teams with disciplined speed toward the dormitory sectors and the senior cadet lounges. They were bypassing hardened military targets in favor of soft, personnel-dense areas. This wasn't random violence. It wasn't about destruction. It was a calculated hostage operation. They weren't here to destroy the Academy. They were here to own it, and its students. That's when the first panicked, encrypted transmission from a hegemony squad leader in Sector 9 crackled over a captured comms channel, his voice tight with something that sounded an awful lot like confusion. From the command deck, the tactical display painted a clear, chilling picture. The hegemony boarding parties weren't scattering. They weren't engaging our scattered security teams in firefights. They moved with a single-minded precision that was more unsettling than a chaotic assault. Their vectors converged on one area, the dormitory sectors. The initial assumption, the default military mindset, was objective seizure. They were targeting key infrastructure. Barracks held weapons. Dorms held personnel. It was a standard calculation, but their movement patterns told a different story. They weren't breaching doors with explosives. They were bypassing hardened security points and using intricate slicing tech on the electronic locks. Their containment fields weren't deployed to cage our defenders. They were used to gently, efficiently corral groups of cadets into manageable clusters. These weren't combat protocols. They were capture protocols. Deliberate, practiced, and designed for live acquisition. The realization was like a cold splash of water. They weren't here to destroy the academy. They were here to inventory it, to leverage its most valuable assets, the students. You have to understand the student body. This wasn't a collection of random recruits. The Galactic Defense Academy is the premier institution. Its cadets are the sons and daughters of planetary governors, fleet admirals, the CEOs of major corps that build warships. They are heirs. They are political leverage on a galactic scale. The value of holding them hostage, of having that many scions of powerful alliance families in one place under control, was incalculable. It exceeded the strategic value of the facility itself 10 times over. This wasn't a military target. It was a political one. Commander Vex 9 saw it before anyone else. His face, illuminated by the flickering tactical screens, went from focused to grim. "They're not here for a fight," he said, his voice low. "They're here for a negotiation." That shift in understanding changed everything. Standard defense protocols are built for tactical engagement. They assume an enemy you can outshoot, outmaneuver, or outthink. They don't account for an enemy whose primary weapon is the threat of harm to innocents. Every instinct to fight back, to repel boarders, to retake the station became potentially disastrous. A firefight in the dormitories wouldn't be a victory. It would be a catastrophe. We were suddenly playing a different game entirely, one with rules written by the hostage-takers. The resolution was a sickening kind of paralysis. Our hands were tied by the very value of what we were supposed to protect. Conventional resistance wasn't just difficult, it was the wrong move. It played directly into their strategy. The command deck fell into a frustrated silence, officers looking at their consoles, at the displays showing the hegemony teams methodically securing hallway after hallway and having no viable response. We were strategists without a strategy, soldiers without a clear enemy to engage. The perfect, horrifying efficiency of their plan was its political cleverness. It neutralized us without firing a shot our way. That's when the first panicked transmission cut through the tense quiet. It was on a hegemony command frequency we'd just managed to patch into, the voice of a squad leader, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The signal origin was Sector 9. He wasn't reporting a capture. He wasn't requesting orders. He was describing something his training had not prepared him for. His voice was tight, straining against a confusion that bordered on fear. The words were jumbled, but one phrase came through clear. Movement pattern, nonlinear. Request confirmation on target location. It doesn't make sense. The transmission cut into static. On the main display, the icon representing his squad in Sector 9 flickered, then vanished from the board entirely. Commander Vex 9 finally broke the silence. The question hung there, simple and direct, cutting through the hum of damaged equipment and the static of disbelief. "How?" he asked, his voice low but carrying across the entire observation deck. "Does a species, an individual, with this capability remain entirely off our strategic threat matrix?" It was the question everyone was thinking. The assumption was a given. They'd just witnessed a display of controlled, overwhelming force that redefined their understanding of biomechanical limits. The logical conclusion was obvious. Luna Reeves wasn't just a soldier. She had to be humanity's ultimate warrior, a pinnacle specimen, a result of some secret breeding program or advanced augmentation hidden from galactic surveys. They'd categorized her again, just in a different, more alarming file. Luna turned from the last deactivated drone. She looked at the commander, her expression unchanged. That same calm, almost placid neutrality. "I'm not," she stated. The words were flat, factual. There was no hint of modesty or deceit. It was a simple correction. "You're not what?" Commander Vex 9 asked, his brow furrowing. The confusion on the deck was a physical thing. "I am not particularly strong or fast by human standards," she clarified, as if discussing the weather. "On Earth, my physical metrics are considered average. My reaction times, my endurance, my raw lifting capacity, all fall within the median range for my age and gender." She paused, then added a detail that seemed to fracture the very air in the room. "My maximal grip strength is actually slightly below the global average. The tests are quite standardized." The juxtaposition was utterly break their understanding. Galactic species development followed predictable scaling. Physical capability, especially in combat-applicable forms, correlated directly with size, muscle density, and neural conductivity. A being that could shatter advanced combat drones with its bare hands should, by every known law of biophysics, register as an extreme outlier on every physical metric. It should be bursting with kinetic potential, a walking power source. Instead, she was describing herself as ordinary. The silence stretched thick and heavy. You could see the officers trying to process it, their minds hitting a wall of cognitive dissonance. If this was average, what did that imply about human elite forces? What did it say about their soldiers, their athletes, their specialists? The scale of the miscalculation was so vast it was almost funny. Instructors exchanged glances across the deck, a silent conversation of raised eyebrows and slight shakes of the head. This wasn't just a tactical error. It was an existential one. Their entire threat assessment model for humanity, a species they had confidently filed under technologically curious, physically unremarkable, was now completely worthless. It required not an update, but a total recalibration from the ground up. Every algorithm, every predictive simulation, every diplomatic profile was built on a foundation of sand. The quiet in the arena was no longer about shock. It was about a deep professional dread. Luna observed their reaction. She seemed to register the shift, the dawning comprehension of the paradox she represented. She delivered the final blow not with a demonstration but with words. "My skill set is basic infantry training," she said. "Standard for many. The specialized units, they are something else entirely." She left it there. No elaboration, no grand description. Just the mention of specialized units hanging in the air. An unspoken promise of capabilities that made her own terrifying display seem like a child's game. It was a door cracked open, revealing not a room but an abyss. The implication was clearer than any boast. She was the baseline, the ordinary, and humanity had entire branches of military structure dedicated to moving far, far beyond it. Instructor Kelm Prime couldn't let it go. The mention of specialized units hung there, a loose thread in their unraveling understanding of humanity. He leaned forward, his professional curiosity overriding his earlier disdain. "These specialized units," he began, his tone now carefully neutral. "Could you elaborate on your military structure, planetary defense formations, standard infantry divisions?" The setup was based on galactic norms. Every spacefaring species organized their militaries along similar lines. Large, visible forces designed for fleet engagements and territorial defense. They expected names of legions or fleets, something that fit neatly into their strategic databases. They were looking for a known quantity to categorize, a box to put humanity's martial capability into. Luna looked at him, her head tilted slightly. "Our defensive forces are public," she said. "But you mean the tip of the spear?" She paused as if accessing a mental file. "There are the Rangers. Their training focuses on prolonged operation in extreme isolation. Then the Marine Corps. They specialize in expeditionary warfare from ship to shore. And Delta Force. Their mission set involves precise, surgical direct action." She said the names without emphasis. Rangers, Marines, Delta Force. They were just words to the listening officers, designations with no galactic history or reputation, yet each one landed with a certain weight, a concrete specificity that suggested deep meaning behind the simple labels. These weren't vague titles. They were precise identifiers for tools designed for specific tasks. The real tension came from her next statement. Her voice remained flat, informative. "These groups specialize in breaking things that need to be broken." The phrasing was utterly deliberate. It wasn't about conquest or annihilation. It wasn't destroying the enemy or achieving orbital superiority. It was breaking things. The implication was one of immense, focused precision. A locksmith doesn't smash a door. They break the lock. A surgeon doesn't obliterate an organ. They remove a tumor. The statement suggested a level of discernment and control that was far more terrifying than mindless aggression. It implied the ability to identify a single critical point in a vast, complex system and apply exactly the force required to disable it, and nothing more. Commander Vex 9, who had been silently absorbing the exchange, slowly nodded. You could see the strategic implication dawning on him. This wasn't about raw power, though that was evidently there in abundance. It was about disciplined mastery. It was about having a toolbox filled with instruments of various purposes, each wielded by experts who knew not just how to use them, but when and why, and to what exact effect. The conversation on the observation deck had completed its shift. The dismissive condescension was gone, burned away by the demonstration in the arena. It had been replaced by a wary, deeply professional respect. They weren't dealing with a reckless, aggressive species. They were dealing with a precise one. The resolution was clear. Humanity's strength didn't lie in overwhelming numbers or flashy technology they could parade on a recruitment vid. It lay in discrete specialization, in units that operated quietly without fanfare, their very existence perhaps unknown until the moment they were needed to break something specific. It was a strategic doctrine built on efficiency and deniability. However, the full terrifying implications of that doctrine, of what it truly meant to have a species that weaponized precision on that scale, wouldn't become clear to anyone in that room until the attack came. The theory was sound. The practical demonstration was about to arrive. The initial reports from Sector 9 were just coordinates on a tactical map. Luna Reeves had been assigned to a dormitory in that section for incoming exchange students. The command deck's working assumption was simple and grim. She was trapped there, another name on the growing list of hostages. Just another civilian asset, another complication in the negotiation equation. We added her to the whiteboard under non-combatant personnel at risk. The setup was pure logic. She was a student, unarmed, surrounded by hostile professional soldiers. She needed protection, or at the very least, she needed to be accounted for when the eventual rescue or bargaining began. Then the hegemony command channel, the one we were desperately monitoring, started to fill with strange traffic. The tension began with curt, confused requests for verification. A squad leader would report contact at one end of a corridor. Seconds later, another unit would report an engagement at the complete opposite end of the same sector, a physical impossibility given the containment fields and the labyrinthine layout of the Academy's interior. The reports accelerated. They started describing movement patterns that outright defied physics. She was reported simultaneously in multiple locations within the same 30-second time frame. The descriptions weren't of a person running or hiding. They spoke of a figure moving through solid walls, appearing in sealed rooms, and traversing corridors without using the doors. Her mobility was the focus of their increasingly panicked communiques. It matched no known species capability in the Galactic Alliance database. There's no technology for personal phasing, no biological trait that allows matter to pass through matter. The hegemony soldiers, disciplined professionals trained for a dozen different combat scenarios, had no frame of reference. Their transmissions became littered with broken, superstitious phrases. They described her as not by the void and not normal. One soldier, his voice cracking with static and stress, reported she moved like a bad signal, flickering in and out of perception. The descriptions pointed to one of two terrifying possibilities. Either she was utilizing a form of advanced personal technology we couldn't begin to comprehend, or she was capable of some form of perceptual manipulation, bending sight and sound to create these impossible illusions. On the command deck, we struggled. We stared at the audio transcripts and the conflicting location pings on the map. We tried to cross-reference them, to find the error, to force the data to make sense. It was impossible. The quiet, pale student we had watched in the arena, the one we had dismissed and then cautiously respected, simply could not be the source of these reports. The two images refused to reconcile. The cognitive dissonance was a tangible pressure in the room. We were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and the hole was getting smaller. The resolution came not from a single report, but from the pattern. We stopped looking at the reports as mistakes and started looking at them as data points. The locations weren't random errors. They formed a path. A devastatingly efficient non-linear patrol route that covered the entire sector. She wasn't appearing in multiple places at once. She was simply moving between engagement points faster than anyone could track or believe. She wasn't trapped in Sector 9. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't a victim. The realization was a cold shock that washed over the entire command staff. We had it completely backwards. Luna Reeves wasn't trapped in the building with them. The hegemony assault force was trapped in the building with her. She wasn't needing protection. She was hunting. Systematically, silently, and with a methodology we could not fathom, she was hunting them. That's when the first fractured security feed finally cleared up and reached the command center's main screen, giving us visual evidence of what their radios could only describe in panicked, broken phrases. The security feeds from Sector 9 resolved from static into a clear, impossible image. Corellian power armor, the absolute pinnacle of personal defensive technology, lay scattered across the corridor. It wasn't simply disabled, it was breached. The hardened chest plates and reinforced joint casings were peeled back, bent outward from the center in jagged petal-like shapes. They looked less like shattered equipment and more like metallic flowers that had violently blossomed and died. The setup was familiar to every officer on the deck. That armor was supposed to be impervious to small arms fire, capable of withstanding direct hits from plasma casters. It represented a technological barrier no unarmed being should ever cross. The empty suits told the real story. They weren't scorched from energy weapons or dented from explosive concussions. They were simply open. The damage patterns were clinical, almost surgical. Each breach point showed a precise application of force focused on a specific weak point, a seam, a joint, a sensor cluster. This wasn't about overwhelming power. It was about perfect, brutal efficiency. It was the difference between using a sledgehammer and a locksmith's pick. One is blunt force, the other is a key. Then the feed panned and we saw her. Luna moved through the chaos with a restrained, clinical brutality that was far more chilling than any display of rage. She didn't charge. She didn't roar. She flowed. A high Gemini soldier would raise his rifle, and she would already be inside his guard. A simple, precise motion, a palm strike to the elbow joint, a finger jab to the neck seal, and the armor would simply come apart. The enemy's response was pure panic. Their standard counter tactics, their fluid fireteam maneuvers, their adaptive combat algorithms, they were useless. They were designed to fight opponents who operated on known principles of warfare. Luna did not. She moved through their formations like a virus through a healthy body, dismantling the system from within. She eliminated wave after wave of armored, heavily armed soldiers without appearing to exert any significant effort. There was no heavy breathing, no visible strain. Her expression, when the camera caught a glimpse, was the same placid neutrality she'd had in the arena. It was just work. Methodical, professional work. The visual evidence was undeniable and utterly contradictory. It flew in the face of every known human capability assessment in the Galactic database. Our files said their bodies were soft, their skeletons fragile, their muscles weak. Our screens showed them tearing open battle armor with their bare hands. The resolution on the command deck was a silent, collective understanding. The Hyegemeni force, so confident and controlled minutes before, was now completely on the defensive. They were playing a desperate game of catch-up against an opponent whose capabilities were unpredictable and whose tactics were incomprehensible. Their perfect hostage operation had acquired a variable they could not control. However, Commander Vex 9, his eyes fixed on the screen, saw something else. He wasn't just watching the destruction. He was studying the method. "Look at the containment fields," he said, his voice low. The rest of us had been focused on the violence. He was focused on what wasn't happening. The walls weren't scarred by stray fire. The emergency bulkheads were undamaged. The other sealed dormitory doors, the ones holding the other captured cadets, remained intact. The devastation was incredibly focused. It was only applied to the immediate threats. This wasn't unbridled aggression. This was something else entirely. Something far more calculated. Commander Vex 9 stared at the security feed, his face illuminated by the flickering screen. The initial assumption, the natural one, was that we were witnessing uncontrolled violence. A creature of immense power finally unleashed, a berserker rage given form. The setup was right there. The torn armor, the broken bodies, the relentless advance. It was the obvious conclusion. A weapon had been activated, and it was doing what weapons do. But the commander wasn't looking at the destruction. He was studying the empty spaces around it. The tension in the room shifted from awe to a deeper, more chilling understanding as he pointed it out. "Look at the walls," he said, his voice low. Not a single energy scar from a stray shot. "Look at the sealed dormitory doors, all intact. The emergency bulkheads were undamaged. The other cadets, the actual hostages, remained perfectly safe behind their barriers. The evidence, when you stopped looking at the chaos and started looking at the pattern, showed something else entirely. A precise, calculated application of force. Exactly the amount necessary. Nothing more. She neutralized threats without a single instance of excessive damage or collateral casualties. Her movements were a masterclass in economy of motion. Every step, every turn, every strike served a dual purpose, ending an immediate threat and positioning her for the next. There was no wasted energy, no flashy theatrical moves. It was pure efficiency. Her situational awareness was absolute. She knew the location of every enemy soldier, every piece of cover, every potential hazard in the environment. She wasn't just fighting. She was managing the entire battlefield in her head, solving a complex, violent problem in real time. This wasn't rage. The quiet, focused expression on her face confirmed it. This was professional problem-solving. The violent dismantling of the hegemony force was just the tool she was using to achieve the objective: the security of the academy and its students. The paradox that emerged was far more profound than simple power. Her true strength wasn't in her ability to unleash force. It was in her ability to hold back, to control it with pinpoint accuracy, to decide moment by moment exactly how much was needed and not 1 ounce more. The restraint was the skill. The power was just the resource. The most dangerous beings in the galaxy are not the ones who are always loud, always threatening, always showing their fangs. Those you can prepare for. You can measure them. You can build a defense. The truly dangerous ones are those like Luna. The ones who look unremarkable. The ones who stay quiet. The ones you never see coming until the moment they choose to act. And when they do, it's not an explosion. It's a surgical incision. On the command deck, the resolution was immediate. Luna transformed in our assessment. She was no longer a feared anomaly, an unpredictable variable. She was a weaponized advantage, a precise instrument that had suddenly fallen into our hands. The grim tension of the hostage situation didn't vanish, but it was now tempered with a cold, sharp hope. We had a countermeasure we never knew existed. That's when the hegemony command channel, the one we'd been monitoring for their panicked reports, activated with a new signal. It wasn't another confused squad leader. The voice that came through was different, calmer, older. It carried the weight of command, and it wasn't addressed to its own troops. It was a broadcast on an open frequency meant for us. The voice that cut across the hegemony command frequency wasn't what we expected. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't the strained tone of a squad leader reporting impossible movements. This voice was different, calm, level. It carried the weary authority of high command, the kind of voice used for delivering terms, not requesting orders. We knew the voice of General Craig Prime from intercepted briefings, but we'd never heard it like this. The setup was clear. After the initial assault and the successful capture of key sectors, the logical next step was the negotiation. We braced for the demands, the list of concessions, the political terms for the release of the cadets. We expected a lengthy, fraught dialogue where we had no leverage. Then he spoke. And the terms were not what anyone anticipated. "This is General Craig Prime of United Earth Command," the voice stated, clear and devoid of theatricality. "We are offering an immediate cessation of all hostilities and the full evacuation of your forces from Galactic Defense Academy premises." The statement was so far from a demand, it was disorienting. It was an offer, a gift. The tension on our deck was a tight wire. Why would the winning side offer to leave? The condition followed. "In exchange," the general continued, his tone utterly matter-of-fact, "you will withdraw your craft immediately. You will take your wounded and your dead, and you will pretend this conversation never occurred." There was no threat in the words, no bluster. It was a simple transactional proposal. Leave now and we will all agree to forget this ever happened. The audacity of it was staggering. They had us. They had the academy. They had the heirs to half the galaxy, and they were offering to walk away for nothing more than our silence. Then he delivered the alternative. The general's voice didn't change. It remained that same flat informational tone. "The alternative," he said, "is we find out what happens when humans stop being polite." The phrasing was deceptively simple, almost colloquial, but it carried a weight that crushed the air out of the command deck. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a screamed threat. It was a calm, factual warning. It implied a threshold, a line that had not yet been crossed. Luna Reeves in the corridors, dismantling squads with clinical precision. That was humanity being polite. That was them holding back. The alternative was the thing they chose not to show us. The thing that came after the gloves came off. The silence on the hegemony frequency was absolute. We could imagine their command ship, their own tactical displays showing the same catastrophic losses in Sector 9. the same inexplicable reports. They faced a threat their intelligence could not categorize and their tactics could not counter. More than that, they faced a species whose capabilities were an unknown depth. They recognized this wasn't a bluff. It was a statement of probability, a warning of a future they very much wished to avoid. The resolution was almost anticlimactic. After a long pause, a new voice, hushed and strained, acknowledged on the hegemony channel. Terms accepted, withdrawing. There were no questions. No attempts to negotiate. They conceded. Not under direct assault, but under the heavy, unspoken curtain of that deterrent. The threat of what came next was more powerful than any weapon currently deployed. However, as their ships began to disengage and the containment fields flickered away, the command deck was left in a profound silence. The immediate crisis was over, but a larger one had just begun. We had witnessed something that defied explanation. We had won without firing a shot, saved by an asset we never knew we had. The aftermath wasn't about damage control or repairs. It was about answering a single terrifying question that now hung over every strategic meeting, every diplomatic discussion, every future assessment of humanity. What exactly had just happened, and what did it mean for the rest of us?